Cool. Hello and welcome. I'm Angela Turton from Action Coach Oakham and Kettering, and today I'm talking to Rosie Wright from Brixworth Wills. Many of our clients are working towards a business that works without them. We aim to get them there on their terms, but sometimes plans go awry. And this is why I wanted to bring Rosie into the conversation today. We are going to talk to you today about what happens to your business when something unexpected happens to you. So Rosie, welcome.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
And do you want to just tell us a little bit about your business first?
Of course, yes. So Brixworth Wills is my company. It's been running for about 3.5 years now. And it does what it says on the tin, focuses on wills, also on powers of attorney. A little bit about my background, I guess. I spent 20 years practicing as a solicitor and then left to set up Brixworth Wills. Just gives me a bit more time to spend with clients and provide that bespoke personal service that is useful, I think.
Definitely is. And how have you been coping through the current, or the hopefully nearly ended, crisis with COVID?
It's been really challenging. Wills are considered essential, so I have been able to continue to work throughout. And lots of clients have wanted to make sure their wills are in place for fairly obvious reasons. But it's definitely been a challenge. I've done a lot of garden appointments. Luckily, the weather was kinder to us last year than it has been this year so far. But it's also brought home the importance of powers of attorney. That first 3 months when people over 70 were advised not to leave their house left a lot of them with difficulties because nobody else could access their accounts for them and things like that. So I think it's been a terrible time for everybody, but one that has perhaps not been as difficult for me as it has been for some people.
And have you found a lot more people are wanting to, new people are coming to you to have wills?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's brought home to people that nobody knows what's going to happen. It's so, I mean, it is very unlikely that it happen to any of us in the near future, but it is the one thing in life that is certain. We're all going to die at some point. It's just the timing is unknown.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Cheerful.
well, as the quote is, nothing is certain except for death and taxes. So, but today we've got another quote in mind. We've got start with the end in mind. And again, there's nothing more final than death. But we're not just talking about death today, are we? We're talking about what happens if you are incapacitated as well. So I must admit that before you spoke to us at the business rooms, I wasn't aware about business wills and business power of attorneys. So I think probably the best thing is just for you to explain what they are and why we need them.
Okay, no problem. So there's not a specific thing called a business will or a business power of attorney. It's just that if you are a business owner, you should make sure your will and your power of attorney reflects your business. So for example, in terms of powers of attorney, if I can explain briefly what they are, then I'll explain why it links to businesses. A power of attorney is a legal document that you put in place to cover the eventuality that you can't manage your affairs for yourself, whether that's on a temporary or permanent basis. And using myself as an example, I have a husband and a son who is 20, and so they are my attorneys, which is great for my personal affairs. If anything happened to me, they would be perfect. In terms of my business, however, neither of them are great with wills or paperwork or organisation. I wouldn't want them managing the business. So I have a separate power of attorney to deal with my business affairs, and I've appointed a friend, colleague who is a will writer as well, and so will actually be able to sensibly manage the business for me if I became incapacitated. So the point in thinking about your business power of attorney is really making sure you've got the right people. You've got the right people and you've given them the right authorities. And the same thing really applies to wills. Again, you don't need a separate, well, sorry, with powers of attorney, you put a separate one in for your business. You have one for your business and you have one for your private life. With a will, you have one document that covers both, but within that, you might make specific provision for your business. And there's a number of reasons for doing that. One is, again, to make sure the right people are appointed. The right people to manage your personal affairs may not be the right people to manage your business affairs, but equally, you might not want your business, the people who manage your business managing your personal affairs. So you can choose different people, but also you can make specific provision within a will. And you really kind of need to think about what you envisage happening to the business. It's never a nice thing to think about, but obviously we work so hard to build up our businesses. To not look ahead is just not facing up to our responsibilities, perhaps. So think about if you weren't there, would your business continue? So for me, there's only me. If I wasn't here, there would be no business. I'd obviously have to finish off my clients, or somebody would need to finish off my clients, not me.
I'm the dead, yes.
But we're not looking at running it as a long-term business. So the job of my executives would be to close it down and manage it. And I need to appoint the right people for that. For some people, their businesses would continue without them, and what you're looking for is providing an income for your family from it. So again, you need to identify the right people and make sure you're giving them the right authority and the right power so it can continue seamlessly.
So how do you start those conversations? Because they must be quite difficult. I mean, for us, for example, Rupert and I are running the business together. But if I was incapacitated for any reason, then he probably wouldn't have 100% focus. Well, I would hope he wouldn't have 100% focus on the business, and that a little bit of that would be on me. So how do you go about actually talking to business owners about what they have to think about when they're drawing up both sets of documents?
Generally, by the time people come to me, they're already aware that they need to think about this. It's already come onto their radar that they really ought to think about the future. But it begins with a practical conversation. Ignore the technicalities. The technicalities is my problem. You need to work out what you want. So we have to go through the scenarios. What would happen if you were in hospital for 6 weeks and unable to communicate? And we have to work through that. And it is talking through the options, and people don't always know the answer, but they can usually work out the answer or what they would want to happen or what they've got to put in place. So, we would talk through that. Well, for a week, it wouldn't matter. Everything, it could wait till I got back. But if it was 6 weeks, okay, so how am I going to pay the rent? Somebody would need to do that. Who's the right person to do? Oh, okay. So we could ask my husband, oh no, because he's going to be looking after me and I want him to be looking after me. Maybe my business partner, maybe my accountant, so it's looking at the options available. And that's the other thing, is you can only work with what you've got. In my case, I'm lucky to have a friend, co-worker who would be able to take over from me. If you've only got one sibling and no other family and no other friends, then that person is just going to have to do everything. So you have to kind of think practically about what your situation is and what the best option is available.
When we're looking at slightly bigger companies where they've got teams in place and maybe the person who's writing this is the owner and is still involved in the business, how do they go about choosing that one person who perhaps isn't being primed at this moment for leadership?
Well, first thing, it doesn't need to just be one. You could have 2 or 3, and certainly in a big business, one might not be enough. The other thing is, it's a really difficult decision, because in a bigger business, if you choose somebody who already works in the business, so for example, you're a member of your senior management team who is also a shareholder, then they're in a position of conflict between managing what's best for them as an individual and managing what's best for you as an individual if you're either incapacitated or passed away. So you do have to weigh up quite carefully who the right person is. You know, the right person to manage the business may not be the right person to determine the dividends. So sometimes you have to have two people to balance it out, and you know, just make sure there isn't too much of a conflict. But also you need to have thought about it, and often need to think about taking out insurance, because people don't realize how much you do in a business. You know, if you weren't there, to replace you would cost an awful lot of money. And therefore it's sometimes worth taking out insurance to be able to have that money, either for the company to be able to employ somebody else, or alternatively for the company to be able to buy out the shares from the surviving spouse or family.
So is there people who do this professionally? I mean, can you employ somebody, you know, in days gone by, you might have had your solicitor as your trustee or something. I mean, but they have not necessarily the same business sense that you do.
You can employ professional trustees. There are two types really, either solicitors. Most solicitors will act as professional trustees, but you would generally appoint the firm rather than the individual solicitor, because the problem with appointing an individual person, and the reason I don't act as professional trustee, is that if I pop my clogs, that's no help to anybody else. Whereas if you appoint a firm, there's always going to be somebody there. And sometimes that's a common solution, a firm of solicitors and somebody from the business. The solicitor can then manage the sort of the legal side of it and make sure that there's no conflict, nothing dodgy going on, and the business partner can manage the actual business side of it. Alternatively, there are trustee corporations which exist to do the same thing. But you're quite right, neither of those will have the business knowledge that you do. So sometimes accountants will get involved and act as trustees, but again, it will depend upon your accountant and whether they're the right person.
And I suppose if you've been going through a process of getting your business ready for you to step back, so you've been putting systems and processes in place, then that makes it a lot easier if somebody outside has to step in.
It does, you're right. It's also what I find is particularly useful when we're having this conversation. If it's, you know, there's 3 or 4 shareholders and we're looking at it from my client's perspective, I also ask them to think what they would want to happen if one of their other shareholders passed away or lost capacity, because that then is looking at it from the other perspective and is often a much bigger motivation to get their own affairs in order, because the idea of what would happen if one of their co-shareholders wasn't able to act brings home the problem, because they would be the one trying to sort it out.
And as a former accountant, I probably should know this, but if you had a business power of attorney or a business will put in place, is that tax deductible, or is that a personal expense?
Well, I am not an accountant, so I
no.
but my understanding is that certainly business powers of attorney and business wills are deductible expenses. You are doing the business power of attorney is purely for the business. If you didn't have a business, you wouldn't need to do it. So I think that is a clear-cut business expense. In terms of the business wills, because it's the same document as your personal will, then you might have to split it. You know, there might be an element that is not business, but in most cases, a business will is more expensive than a straightforward will, because by its nature, it's more complicated, and therefore there must be an element of it that is attributable to the business.
And what stage in your business life should you start thinking about putting one of these in? Is it something that, you know, you get your certificate of incorporation and your business will, or is it something you do later on?
Well, my advice would always be to have these things in place as soon as possible, because the whole point is you just don't know. You know, you just don't know when this is going to happen and when it's going to be needed. And particularly with the powers of attorney, if there's a temporary loss of capacity, I mean, COVID has actually provided really good examples of how useful this is. If you've got a business, you got COVID, you were really, really poorly for 6 weeks, so completely out of action, but then luckily made a full recovery, you need a business to come back to. If you haven't made provision for that, that 6 weeks might have finished it off. So I would say as early as you can.
Okay. And if you have diligently gone out and got yourself a will, or you've got the document in place, do you need to have that completely redone, or is there a way of adding to it?
You can do a codicil, which is a formal change to an existing will. So you might not need to have the new will redone. Sorry, you might not have to replace your old will. You might just be able to add to it. But it depends on, as part of the process of looking at a business will, you would look at everything that you wanted to do. So assuming that your original will still reflected all your wishes and was still fit for purpose, you could add the new bits in by way of a codicil. But sometimes what you choose to do in your business reflects and alters what you choose to do in your personal life. So it does depend on the original will still being effective.
Thank you. And how long is the process? How long does it take to get one of these in? Have I asked the how long is a piece of string question?
You absolutely have for a will. So a will should be relatively straightforward. The process begins with an initial meeting where the client sits down with their advisor and talks through what they want to achieve and the best way of doing that. Sometimes the client knows all the answers at that meeting and we can proceed straight away. They can instruct, a draft can be prepared within a couple of weeks. They check it and it's signed and it can all be done and dusted in 6 weeks. Sometimes it's not that straightforward, and we've identified some of the difficult decisions that have to be made. So sometimes clients need to go away and think about it, talk to their fellow shareholders or partners and work out how the best way of structuring it is. So that thought process at the start can take a bit longer. With powers of attorney, they are out of my hands. So again, you have the initial meeting and you have the thought process that needs to be gone through. But then once the client's decided what they want to do, it's relatively quick for me to draw up the formal documents. They then need signing by the client, by a certificate provider, and by all the attorneys. So the first opportunity to delay is how long it takes the attorneys to return paperwork. And sometimes that can be longer than you would hope for. So that can sort of drag it out. And then once it has been signed by everybody, it has to be registered with the Office of Public Guardian. And that's taking about 10 to 12 weeks at the moment. Pre-COVID, they'd got it down to about 8 weeks. But in the height of the pandemic, it was months and months and months to get them back. But they are getting back into a routine, but they're predominantly their staff are still working from home, so everything is just taking longer.
Interesting. And the attorneys are publicly who are the attorneys you mentioned, because that's not just another word for a lawyer, is it?
No, it's not. Sorry, the attorneys are the people that you choose to deal with your affairs in your capacity. So they're the people that you appoint. So it shouldn't take long. There's no reason for it to take long, but sometimes it's not on the top of their priority list. So it might be your business partner, your spouse, your accountant.
And I've spoken to you before. You've talked about what happens if you don't have a personal power of attorney in, and then you have to go to the court. And so, is that the same situation if you're in that situation with your business, or does your business just?
Well, it's the same situation really. The point in a power of attorney is it gives somebody else the authority to deal with your affairs if you can't deal with them yourself. And the same thing would apply to a business. So if you are the only signatory on your bank account and you don't have the capacity to sign, the bank account will be frozen and they will do nothing without either power of attorney or an order from the court. Which means you can't pay your suppliers, you can't get access to any funds from it, you can't pay your staff. I mean, it just would lead the business to implode in most cases. Things like signing off accounts. Your accountant can't take instructions from anybody other than you. If you're in a bigger business and the accountant can take instructions from various people, then that may be less of a problem. But anything that you are personally responsible for, that needs you to make a decision or your signature, if you can't do that, then those things can't happen.
So could you be in a situation where you're in hospital and incapacitated, and then you come back and find that your business has had Company's House has closed your business underneath you.
Yeah,
No, that has happened, has it?
yeah. I mean, that's longer term, obviously, but yeah, absolutely. It's not usual. This is not this is a relatively low risk of something happening. It's not something that happens on a regular basis, to be pleased to know.
We'll stand down.
Most of us run our businesses and close them down when we want to, as opposed to, but it is, it could be a car accident, it could be a stroke, it could be COVID, it could be anything that triggers this, and that's the problem. We don't know, so we have to prepare.
Wonderful. So is there anything else that we need to know about this very important area of
I mean, there's lots, but the only other thing really that springs to mind is about inheritance tax. So there are rules about inheritance tax for individuals and how much you can leave without paying any. There is also an inheritance tax is chargeable at 40%. So it's quite a significant tax if you fall into the group of people who have to pay inheritance tax. But there is a relief known as business property relief that is available in certain circumstances. So that is something else that you would look at as part of your business will, whether you've got an inheritance tax issue, and if you do have, how to make sure that we're maximising the reliefs that are available. And that usually requires making specific provision for your business within your will.
Wonderful. So it all ties together, and you're okay. And I guess at the end of the day, a will is about making things easy for people who have been left behind, and not necessarily for you, because you won't be around to see it. So.
I often say that the power of attorney is even more important, because actually you're going to be alive during that power of attorney, and it's going to be you directly that suffers if it's not in place. But you're absolutely right. A will is about protecting those that you leave behind, not necessarily yourself.
Wonderful. And if people who are watching this want to get in touch, we'll put all your details in the chat so that you can see how to get hold of Rosie.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosie, for being my guest today. It's been a pleasure to talk to you as always. Thank you.
Very welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Right, you can stand down now.